What if the most powerful revolution in Africa isn't happening on a battlefield but on a construction site, in a classroom, and on a cashew farm? Under the uncompromising leadership of President Ibrahim Traoré, Burkina Faso is not just building a city, it's rewriting the rules of what post-colonial African development can look like. This isn't urban planning. It's an uprising in concrete. The so-called Renaissance city isn't simply about housing or roads. It's a monument to defiance, a statement written in steel and stone. Africa will no longer wait for Western approval, nor beg for its aid. It will build, it will rise, and it will do so on its own terms. If that sounds bold, it's because it is. And maybe that's the point. Let's face it, many Africans have grown tired of a world that only shows up when it smells profit. Gold, oil, weapons deals, military bases. That has been the story for decades. Even at the highest levels of diplomacy, disrespect was casual, like when U.S. President George W. Bush once called Africa a nation, not a continent, a nation. That slip revealed more than just ignorance. It spoke volumes about how Africa has been perceived as a monolith, misunderstood and undervalued. But what if one of the world's poorest countries, long dismissed as unstable and irrelevant, was quietly crafting a new future, one without loans from the IMF, one without the tight grip of donor agendas, landlocked and once gripped by coups, colonization, and corruption? Burkina Faso was seen as a permanent footnote in West African politics. By 2021, it was reeling. Terrorist attacks displaced more than 2 million citizens. Inflation was suffocating families. Schools had shuttered, farmers abandoned their land, and roads were left to decay. Foreign NGOs rushed in not to fix things, but to manage the chaos. More than 60% of Burkina Faso's national budget came from outside aid. In return, the country handed over its sovereignty, from what children learned in classrooms to how it sourced its power. And then came 2022. A 34-year-old army captain, Ibrahim Traoré, stepped in not with flowery speeches, but with a bulldozer's resolve. Critics called him a radical, but while they whispered in foreign embassies, he went straight to the people. Northern villages, farming communities, displaced families. He didn't wait for foreign funds. He redirected internal resources. Foreign military outposts shut down NGOs, asked to work with the government or leave. Bureaucratic waste was slashed, and every saved dollar reinvested into national development. And then came one of his most daring moves. He nationalized hope. In forgotten towns like Kaya and Dori, places emptied by conflict, his government began handing out land to youth cooperatives, but not with empty promises or donor grants. With tractors, seeds, training, and capital funded not by the UN, but by Burkina Faso's own gold, equals 4 years. Foreign companies extracted gold, leaving the country with pennies on the dollar. That changed under Traoré. Mining contracts were renegotiated, companies were forced to hire locally, build infrastructure, and contribute to regional development. And for the first time, those golden profits stayed within the nation's borders. But gold wasn't the only asset being reclaimed. Agriculture, once overlooked, was transformed into a tool of economic resistance. Take Kambi's theory. Just a few years ago, it was a dusty farming town. Today, it's the heart of a cashew revolution. Before Traoré, farmers tossed away cashew, apples, the fleshy part of the fruit, using only the nut for export. That changed in 2024 when the government built a $1.5 million processing facility in nearby P. The plant now turns that once wasted apple into juice, jam, and concentrates. The result? A 300% surge in agricultural export value in just 18 months. People like Mariam Orago, once displaced and destitute, now work full-time and earn enough to send their children back to school. I used to survive, now I build, she said. And it's not just cashews. Cotton farming, once dominated by raw exports, has seen the rise of local spinning mills. Burkina Faso now exports finished textiles, not just bales of unprocessed fiber. Economic upgrade that's reshaping West African trade patterns. Meanwhile, the country is sprinting toward energy independence. With the help of domestic engineers and Pan-African allies, solar farms have bloomed across the Sahel, cutting the country's reliance on foreign electricity grids by almost 40% in just 2 years. International support hasn't disappeared, just been redefined. Strategic partnerships with countries like China and Russia now focus on technology transfer without subjugation. We choose who we deal with, Traoré declared. We are not anyone's backyard. In Ouagadougou, a quiet tech scene is emerging, supported by government-backed incubators and small business grants. Young entrepreneurs are now building startups where there was once only survival. But perhaps the boldest political move came in 2023. Burkina Faso, alongside Mali and Niger, exited ECOZA regional bloc many saw as a Western proxy. The decision shocked the continent, but it also opened doors. The three nations formed the Alliance of Sahel Sovereigns, prioritizing internal trade, security, and self-reliance. It wasn't isolationism, it was liberation. New desert trade routes, have been established with Algeria and Mauritania, bypassing French-controlled ports. Goods that used to take weeks to arrive via Lome now arrive in 5 days. From a broken system to a self-determined strategy, Burkina Faso isn't chasing miracles, it's making them. Burkina Faso, under Ibrahim Traoré, is no longer begging at the. It is standing tall, building with its own hands, feeding its own people, and choosing its own allies. The revolution isn't televised, it's being harvested, constructed, and coded. Africa isn't waiting anymore. It's arriving. It's raw, it's real, and it's happening. Burkina Faso, once written off as just another fragile state, is now rising with purpose. What the world used to pity, it now watches with a mix of awe and apprehension. This isn't a fluke, this is a blueprint, a case study in what post-colonial Africa could become when it chooses itself first. So, we ask you, could Burkina Faso be Africa's boldest new model for sovereignty? Is this strategy sustainable, or simply symbolic? Share your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to like, subscribe, and spread this story. Because what's happening in the heart of West Africa deserves to be heard. Let's go deeper. This quiet revolution began with something more ambitious than a speech. It started with roads, and not metaphorically, actual roads. We have the resources, said Captain Ibrahim Traoré, so why should we keep waiting? He wasn't wrong. While smaller resource-poor nations in Europe have paved their countryside, Burkina Faso still relied on donors to build basic infrastructure. Traoré launched a state-led road and highway initiative using local materials and workforce. The goal? Link the country's fractured cities and prove that progress doesn't need a Western passport. But the real shock came when this internal push began shifting the entire region. The political quake started in late 2023. Standing before a crowd in Ouagadougou, Traoré declared, "We will no longer be governed by decisions made in Abuja, dictated in Paris, and signed off in Washington. Burkina Faso belongs to its people." That statement cracked open history. Shortly afterward, Burkina Faso, along with Mali and Niger, formally exited ECOWAS, the Economic Community of West African States. The reaction was immediate and fierce. Sanctions slammed down, borders closed, flights grounded, banking systems frozen. But something unexpected happened. The people didn't crumble, they adapted. Across the capitals of Bamako, Niamey, and Ouagadougou, fear gave way to unity. There was a sense of quiet defiance, shaped by years of feeling used by institutions that claimed to help but never truly served. Traoré called it economic detox. Critics called it reckless. But even skeptics started watching more closely. Because this wasn't collapse, it was rebirth. In early 2024, the three nations launched the Alliance of Sahel States, AE. But this wasn't just a political club, it was born of fire. All three had faced coups, extremist violence, and suffocating foreign military footprints. The AES became more than a symbol, it became strategy. They scrapped border controls and unified visa systems. They started coordinating military campaigns with local knowledge, not NATO-style chains of command. Most revolutionary of all, they harmonized trade rules and announced a $500 million Sahel economic corridor, an ambitious network, stretching from Mali's gold mines to Burkina's cashew farms, and down to Niger's uranium fields. No World Bank, no IMF, just national resources, Pan-African expertise, and strategic partnerships with Algeria, Turkey, and Iran. This shift hit France hardest. For decades, Burkina Faso was part of the Francophone chessboard. French troops patrolled the Sahel, the CFA franc kept economies tied to Paris, and France's influence loomed large over policy. But not anymore. Traoré sent the soldiers home. The CFA franc is now under review, and for the first time in over 60 years, Burkina Faso is exploring its own sovereign currency. New partners stepped in, but on Burkina Faso's terms. China brought Belt and Road access, not just with bulldozers, but training programs for local engineers and agronomists. Russia delivered wheat and military advice without imposing political lectures. Iran provided fuel and agricultural expertise. Turkey invested in logistics, roads, and school infrastructure. Meanwhile, Western NGOs that refused to respect local governance were told to pack up. Sovereignty wasn't negotiable anymore. Not everyone is clapping. Critics warn that cutting ECOWAS ties could isolate AES from global trade and financial systems. Some say replacing France with China or Russia is just a new form of dependency. But Traoré's supporters fire back with a sharp truth. At least now, Burkina Faso is making its own choices. As one market trader in Bobo Dioulasso said, "We'd rather eat our own rice than swallow imported politics." And there are results. For the first time in its modern history, Burkina Faso trades more with fellow African nations than with France. Inter-African commerce is up 38%. Domestic production is surging, and young people once politically alienated are now leading startups, rebuilding farms, and rewriting policy. But this revolution runs deeper than trade and infrastructure. It's cultural. In classrooms, French is no longer the only language of instruction. Local languages, like mournful filed, are being restored to their rightful place. Museums are being renovated. Traditional music and dance are making their way into city festivals. Even the school curriculum is being overhauled to celebrate Burkina Faso's own heroes, not colonial generals. This isn't nationalism, it's a cultural healing. And while Traoré avoids global summits and Davos panels, he's been quietly opening trade corridors with Algeria, Ghana, and Egypt. He's rekindled ties with non-francophone nations like Guinea and Sierra Leone, creating unexpected alliances with countries who quietly admire his self-reliance model. It's the story of a nation once pushed to the margins, now carving its own center. And in doing so, it's challenging how Africa sees itself and how the world sees Africa. This is no longer a land of perpetual crisis. This is the land of a new beginning. So what do you think? Can this new model of African independence go the distance? Could the AES become the foundation for a truly sovereign Africa? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if you found this story eye-opening, share it, because the world deserves to know. Burkina Faso is not waiting for permission. It's building without it. Burkina Faso is building quietly but powerfully. It's not investing in flashy skyscrapers instead, it's pouring energy into dry ports, desert railroads, and localized manufacturing. And the results are speaking for themselves. What many once dismissed as populism is now being reconsidered as strategic brilliance. The international press, once skeptical of Captain Ibrahim Traoré, is gradually shifting its tone from suspicion to cautious admiration. Across Africa, eyes are locked on Ouagadougou. The question is no longer will it work, it's who's next. From resisting foreign dominance to redefining regional leadership, Burkina Faso is no longer merely surviving, it's leading. But as with every revolution, the bigger question looms: can it last? In this report, we'll examine the risks, the pushback, and the extraordinary changes taking place beneath the surface, from rural youth-led initiatives to radical educational overhauls. And we'll explore whether this uprising is strong enough to outlive the man who sparked it. On January 29, 2025, a chapter in West African politics officially closed. Burkina Faso, along with its allies Mali and Niger, severed all ties with ECOWAS, the once powerful West African economic bloc. The decision wasn't made overnight. It followed a dramatic December 2024 summit where the writing was already on the wall. After months of tension and failed mediation, the three nations walked away. The response was swift and harsh. Sanctions were imposed, borders shut down, air traffic halted, financial transactions were frozen. But what the world expected came, and collapse never came. Instead, people adapted. In cities like Niamey, Bamako, and Ouagadougou, something remarkable happened. Fear gave way to unity. Years of frustration with foreign-led policies and institutions that spoke for Africans, rather than with them, gave birth to resilience. Traoré called it economic detox. Others called it dangerous. But even critics began to see something different emerging. This wasn't an ending, it was the start of a new chapter in African sovereignty. Out of the ashes of ECOWAS, a new entity was born, the Alliance of Sahel States (EAS). But this wasn't just a political handshake, it was a declaration of shared scars and shared ambition. The EAS united three nations that had each faced coups, terrorism, and suffocating foreign interference. But instead of returning to dependence, they aligned on independence. Within months, EAS rolled out unified visa policies for cross-border movement, coordinated military operations based on local intelligence, not foreign command, joint trade regulations, and infrastructure development. Perhaps the most ambitious initiative yet is the $500 million Sahel Economic Corridor, a transnational lifeline stretching from Mali's gold-rich west to Niger's uranium heartlands to Burkina's thriving cashew farms. No IMF, no World Bank, just self-reliance, and support from nations like Algeria, Turkey, and Iran. This is how modern alliances are being built, not with press releases, but with purpose. But what keeps a revolution alive after the speeches fade? The answer is institutions, education, a generation that not only dreams differently but acts differently. Burkina Faso is one of the youngest countries on earth. Nearly 70% of its population is under 30. For decades, that youth was left voiceless, caught between failing governments and outside influence. But that silence was broken in 2023, with the launch of Project Cora, meaning Rise in Dul. This wasn't just vocational training, it was leadership development rooted in patriotism, self-sufficiency, and hands-on skills. Programs like Seeds of the Nation teach teens to manage irrigation systems, lead cooperatives, and even export crops. In former conflict zones, young people are now growing tomatoes in greenhouses and shipping them to Ghana, not fleeing with empty futures. In cities, code academies and engineering institutes are multiplying, fully funded and staffed by Burkinabè professionals. Here, education is not just a means to escape, it's a strategy to stay and build. Under Traoré, education isn't just changing in content, it's changing in philosophy. Gone are the French-centric colonial curricula. In their place is a bold, Africa-centered framework, focused on economic independence, local languages, agricultural science, cooperative building, civic duty at flagship schools like Ecole Sankara, traditional wisdom and modern science blend. Students are learning not how to leave Burkina Faso, but how to lift it. One student summed it up: "We're not preparing for exams. We're preparing for ownership. No transformation is complete without women. And in this new Burkina Faso, they are not afterthoughts, they are architects." In 2024, Mariam Zongo, a widow and former refugee, became head of the National Agro-Cooperative Agency. Her simple cashew apple processing method, first tested in a refugee tent, has now been replicated in 7 regions. Her success is not an outlier, it's the beginning of a movement. Women entrepreneurs now receive state-backed microloans, tax breaks, and training. In Gorom, a women-led leather goods collective exported nearly $1 million in finished products last year alone. Girls' school enrollment has surged by 27% since 2022 thanks to government-funded sanitary products and safe transport systems. This isn't policy on paper, it's transformation in action. At the heart of this revolution lies something deeper than economics or politics: identity. Colonialism, terror, and foreign agendas once fractured Burkina Faso's sense of self. Today, that identity is being reclaimed. On Independence Day 2024, 2 million trees were planted not by government order, but by grassroots movements. Public media celebrates local inventors, historians, and musicians. National radio airs oral storytelling, proverbs, and ancestral folklore. Burkina Faso is rediscovering its own heartbeat. Not one imposed, but one earned. Of course, challenges remain. Terror threats haven't vanished. Regional instability and global economic pressures are still very real. Western media continues to cast doubt on Traoré, painting him as authoritarian or anti-democratic. Some local civil society voices express concern over power centralization and the lack of a clear succession plan. What happens when Traoré is no longer at the helm? Can the revolution outlast the man? Supporters say yes. They point to regional councils, autonomous cooperatives, and empowered youth networks as proof that Burkina Faso's transformation is structural, not just personal. Still, the road ahead is steepened. The world is watching. In one of his rare international interviews, Traoré said, "We are not asking for applause. We are asking to be left to stand. We are learning, failing, and building. That is sovereignty." That message wasn't just for Burkina Faso, it was for all of Africa. Because whether one agrees with Traoré or not, his leadership has sparked something undeniable. A living example that African transformation doesn't have to be drafted in Paris, approved in Washington, or blessed in Brussels. It can be designed in Ouagadougou, grown from the soil, built by the people. Is this the dawn of a new African era war, a dangerous experiment in